Welcome to another episode of the Doctors and Dollars podcast, where we discuss health insights and wealth secrets. I'm your host, Nate Crannell, joined today by Dr. Keith Matheny. Dr. Matheny is a board-certified otolaryngologist with a focus on rhinology, where he leads Collin County ENT in Frisco, Texas. However, this is not the only business venture under Keith's wing. If you look at his LinkedIn profile, you will see that he is a serial entrepreneur and a visionary in healthcare. From Septum Solutions to US ENT Partners to Sleep Vigil, he is a busy man. Not only that, he also finds the time to provide ENT treatment for the Dallas Cowboys. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Thank you so much, Nate.
What's going well today?
I just finished a great day of clinic. The difference in 1 week is huge. As we sit here recording this, we're early January. And so the difference from the December rush is drastic in a good way. ENT is a specialty, and specifically what I do, sinus and allergy, is really quality of life more so than life and death. And many of us estimate that we do 35 or 40% of our annual business during Q4, just because people have met their deductibles and they kind of put that off until the end of the year. So we work around the clock. Two of my partners actually were operating every Saturday in December just to accommodate patients. And so when we're doing clinic and surgery in January, we can kind of relax and breathe easy, and it's back to normal schedule.
You bet. Just for comparison purposes, how many are you seeing in December between you and your two partners? How many patients are you seeing in December versus, say, January?
Yeah, percentage-wise, it's probably as much as 15, 18% more in December than we do in January. And actually, The lull, since we're talking really about economics today, the lull occurs for ENT and other specialties like mine that are quality of life more in February. We see a little uptick in March because many states have spring break during that time. And so a lot of people have quality of life surgeries like tonsillectomies during that time. And then a little lull in April. Everyone's paying our friends at the IRS. And then picks back up once summer vacation starts from a school standpoint. And a lot of people have procedures done during the summer. We have another nadir in September. And so traditionally, our specialty split with ophthalmology. Many, for those that are a little more mature on the podcast listening, may remember that it used to be eye, ear, nose, and throat. But in 1970, that switched actually when the Academy meeting was here in Dallas, and ophthalmology became a separate specialty, a separate board. And so we have always traditionally had those meetings, our national meetings in September, because business is pretty slow once the kids go back to school. But then it picks back up, as I said, and we make up for it October, November, and especially December.
Absolutely. Do you see population-wise of your practice, is it pretty balanced between adults and kids? Or are you seeing a lot of kids during that summer break and then a lot of the adults near the end of the year once they've met their deductible?
Yeah, I think as a specialty, that's exactly true. A lot of our pediatric work is done, at least school-age kids, so tonsillectomies and things during summer, maybe during Thanksgiving break, during winter break. For me personally, I think as I've gotten more gray hair and my practice has evolved more into revision surgery of other ENT surgeons, sinus surgery, I see more adults now than kids. A lot of the kids that I still take care of are really siblings of prior patients. And so I still care for those families. But most of my new patients would be adults, personally.
That makes sense. So you've been practicing, I don't know if it's been since 2003, but you've had Collin County ENT since 2003.
Oh, yeah. So 2003 is when I finished my training. So I came here, been with the same practice, which we'll talk about in depth, but with wonderful partners and wonderful staff. We've had a lot of business challenges and economic challenges that we'll detail. But yeah, fortunately stayed with the same practice the whole time.
Yeah, just from a specialty standpoint, what attracted you to otolaryngology versus any other specialty coming out of med school?
Yeah, well, prior to med school, I tried to be an athlete. And so, especially playing football, I'm not a very large person. So every season I sustained some substantial orthopedic injury. And so I got to know my orthopedic surgeon, my team surgeon very well. And I had an interest in medicine in general. And so back in those days, the rules at hospitals were very lax. Now it's very hard to bring observers into surgery. But, 35 or 40 years ago, it was the Wild West. And so he could just drag me into any surgery. And so my initial exposure was mostly to orthopedic surgery, which is what he did. Being a baseball player in college too, I kind of went to med school thinking I would be the shoulder and elbow guy, similar to maybe Dr. James Andrews in Birmingham or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But when I went to medical school and I went to the University of Texas, the medical school is located in Houston. The way we do medical education is we group all of the anatomy together. So, for example, when we studied the head and neck, which was early in my freshman year of medical school, we looked at the gross anatomy, so our cadaver lab. We looked at the microscopic anatomy, that's called histology. We studied the physiology of the head and neck and pharmacology of the head and neck. So we put all that in one block of material. And I found that I really enjoyed the intricacy of the head and neck anatomy. And so, again, this would have been in the mid 1990s, but so our specialty has evolved immensely since then as far as technology. But I started watching ENT procedures at that time and found that I really liked the variety. We took care of all ages, as we talked about a moment ago, from premature babies all the way to the elderly. We do half clinic and half surgery, so there's variety even there on a given day. And mostly, though, it's quality of life. We deal with two severe diseases, head and neck cancer, of course, so people like that have cancer of their vocal cords, for example, or their tongue. And then obstructive sleep apnea, which is almost equally dangerous, although people don't take it that seriously. They think it's just snoring and it's kind of funny, but it's actually a very severe disease too. But most of the stuff besides that is really quality of life. And so I'm proud of my younger self for realizing that I wouldn't have to spend as much time in the ER as my orthopedic surgery colleagues, my urology and neurosurgery, other surgical specialties. I wouldn't have to do as much as they did. And so I picked it for all those reasons, as well as just the general personality that goes into ENT. It tends to be a really interesting person with a lot of outside interests, very nice people. I think most sales reps would say that working with ENT surgeons is very pleasant, perhaps compared to other specialties and the typical personalities. And so for all of those reasons, I chose it. And even 25 years later after that choice, I think I made a great choice. It's been fantastic.
Absolutely. It's got to be fun to look back and say, hey, I made a great choice 25 years ago going into this field to wake up each day feeling like you're making an impact or knowing that you're making an impact even. It has to be so positive. And like I mentioned in the bio, you're all over the place with different sectors of healthcare. But the one thing I mentioned was the Dallas Cowboys. I want to touch on that early before we get into the economics of stuff.
Are we going to talk about
How
this controversial call the other night?
if you want to.
No, I don't want to. I'm just glad we won.
Yeah, exactly.
Officially. We're talking,
won.
of course, about the Detroit Lions game. It depends on when people are watching this recording. Yeah, so I don't know. The game was in Dallas. I was not on the sidelines for that particular game. So I don't know if he reported or not.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. I
was going to see if you had insider information, but your work with the Cowboys, is that pretty consistent throughout the season? Is it they just send them your way as a referral basis? I mean, head and neck specialties.
Yeah, it's so much more than just the 53-man roster and the practice squad. So I'm fortunate to work with the entire organization. So many people there. The Cowboys headquarters are right across the street from my office. And so we take care of so many people, even in the business aspects of the organization, do their allergy therapy, like allergy shots, a variety of things, take care of their family members. And so it's been wonderful. Obviously, I grew up as a Cowboys fan. I mostly grew up in Dallas. and then being able to work with him in this capacity for years and meet so many people within the organization has been really wonderful.
That is awesome. Yeah, you are now the second person I know that has been a part of that organization. My cousin, when he was at high school, or excuse me, in college at Iowa State, was an athletic trainer for the Iowa State football team.
Yeah,
There's some type of connection between the head athletic trainer of the Cowboys and the head athletic trainer at Iowa State. I think they're related in some way, and so they always send
yeah,
an intern down each year to work for the
that's
Cowboys
right.
during.
Right.
And my cousin has been a lifelong Dallas Cowboys fan, so when he got the opportunity to go work, he actually went down there for 2 seasons.
Don't tell Brock Purdy that his
Right.
trainer is a lifelong Cowboys fan. Yeah,
Absolutely.
They're-
But yeah, he was a big Jason Witten fan, so he was there during
yeah,
that time and
great
got
guy,
to
great
interact with him.
person.
And yep. And so he said the
He,
same thing. And so
his high school football team just won the state championship here in Texas.
nice,
Jason
which is
Witten,
a big deal.
once he retired from Monday Night Football, he went and coached, I believe, his son at first, but he coaches one of the private schools here in North Texas, and they just won state championship about a month ago. Yeah,
Man, what a great feeling to lead your son and their team to a state championship. I mean, especially in Texas where football is supreme,
yeah, it's still
similar to
big.
how
I mean,
wrestling is in Iowa. Yeah,
right, right. I think it's on par with that. Yeah.
for sure. To what extent, I mean, between allergy shots and things like that, are you still there from like a head and neck injury standpoint? So if there's
Hmm.
concussion
Yeah,
protocol,
yeah.
there's a severe neck injury that happens during a game. Is that why you're there on board?
Yeah, and those two instances are really dealt with by neurology and
Hmm.
neurosurgery, but actually it's multi-specialty. The concussion issue, boy, that's a big topic. I just finished reading two books on that. The one that the ESPN authors wrote, and then the one that they based that movie that Will Smith was the lead character in. Boy, that's a mess, a tangled briar patch that the NFL finds itself in because the sport is as popular as ever, right? But uh, that the reality of CTE is so scary. And I have daughters, so I never had to really face that decision here in Texas, where every male wants to play. In fact, our big high school team that my daughter's graduated from, we have a female kicker, and she's amazing, actually.
Really?
So, there's so much pressure on most males here to play football. But I don't know, knowing what I know now, and this is a big statement for me because I still thoroughly enjoy watching football and being associated with the team. But it's not so much the big concussions, it seems. What I take from reading about that and looking at some of the scientific literature, it's the small bouncing around of the brain inside the skull.
Consistently.
Consistent, especially the linemen, both the offensive and defensive linemen. I mean, every practice, every play, they're knocking heads. And it seems to be that chronic trauma to the brain that's so detrimental in some people. It doesn't seem like it's everybody. And so we just don't really have a good grip on who's going to suffer and who isn't.
Hmm.
But that's an interesting topic is would I have let my son play football if I had a son? Tough to know. Probably I think I would have steered him towards other sports. But in the heat of the moment, if he really wanted to play, who knows what I would have done.
There's a physicality standpoint that I think people overlook when they say, well, they created concussion proof helmets. The padding is more advanced. The game is faster, but it's a lot more focused on speed versus strength like it used to be. I think my argument would be, man, I think every guy back in the 60s and 70s, you just had to be big to be in the NFL. But then you had like those really old rickety helmets, even go back to like the 30s and 40s when they were leather helmets. Like,
Yeah. And
is
it also, some people say, well, there wasn't as much head to head or leading with the head because you knew you didn't have the same protection.
Mhm.
But we've seen a lot of NFL films, and those guys they were tough. I mean, they were making the same hits that they make now. That's what worries me too about the helmet situation is, this is the brain just floats around inside fluid inside a hard case. So I don't really know how a helmet is ever going to help that, right? I
Mhm.
mean, even as I shake my head like this, my brain's moving a little bit. And as you said, when these folks are bigger, faster, stronger, and then they're colliding, sometimes at 18, 19, 20 miles an hour, the brain is just going to bounce around and bounce around no matter what is on the outside of the head, because that's on the inside and it's floating in fluid. So it's a tough problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Physicians Financial Summit is coming to Chicago in 2024. Now, the Physicians Financial Summit is probably exactly the opposite of what you think it is. I'm sure you've gotten a free dinner and went to an event where a financial advisor shared a few things and tips and tricks. That's not what this is. You're not going to get a free dinner, unfortunately, and we are not financial advisors. This is going to be an action-packed 2 days where we break down the exact playbook that I used that allowed me to retire at the age of 33 and is going to guarantee that you are prepared and ready for a prosperous retirement. Now, there's way too much info that I can cover in this video, but I will promise you 2 things. 1, this is going to change your life forever. And 2, we are going to make this much simpler than you realize was possible. Just like you break down important and complicated medical stuff for us as patients, we're going to do the same for you. So, if talking about money would make you want to pull your hair out, this is not the event for you. But if you want to see behind the scenes of how the wealthy prepare their financial futures and what you can do to be better prepared financially, then we will see you there in March 2024, Chicago.
Well, that's got to be exciting. I hope that the Cowboys keep you around, even as you quote unquote retire at some point in the future. They
Yeah,
they keep you around and let you get tickets for all the great service that you've provided to them. But you had mentioned earlier, like getting into ENT and otolaryngology was something that you were never regretful of. It's been very prosperous for you, is the word I want to use. But we had talked offline, like ENT is a very expensive specialty to practice.
Right.
Tell the audience about like what the differences are, private practice as ENT versus private practice, any other specialty. What makes it so expensive?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. So the short answer that we'll elaborate on is where we perform our procedures. So when I was in medical school, most of the things we were doing with head and neck cancer, sinuses, rhinoplasties, nose jobs, ear surgery, voice surgery, whatever, even sleep surgery, was so invasive and often described as barbaric that it had to be done under general anesthesia in a hospital with an ICU for the patient to recover in afterwards. And what's happened over my career, so in that 30 years, technology has advanced so much in our space that we now do things very minimally invasively in almost all cases. And a lot of it is done in our office in an awake patient. And that's great. I mean, that's better on all fronts, unless you have an investment in the hospital. You've lost those procedures, but that's on the hospital to backfill those ORs with other cases. So that's good for the patient, obviously not having general anesthesia, having much lower cost. It's good for the insurance companies, the third-party payers. It's good for the surgeon. In many cases, there's actually better reimbursement from the third-party payers for doing things in the office. So that's all good. But part of the reason that we are paid more to do things in the office is because we now have to buy the supplies. So the sinus surgeries that I do, even 10, 15 years ago when I did them in the hospital, I received a professional fee. I didn't even care about the cost or who paid the bill for the equipment. It was done by the hospital. Now we care very much because I'm the one paying the bill. And so to the tune of roughly $300,000 or $400,000 a year per doctor. So not per practice, but per doctor, just on these high cost disposable supplies, and then a pro rata share of the capital equipment necessary to perform these procedures. So we have to have now very expensive microscopes to do ear surgery, very expensive video towers, so TVs and light sources and those kind of things, TV monitors, etc., to do the nasal surgery. Most of us have a CT scanner in each office. There's one in this behind me. The wall behind me is where our CT scanner is. That wall has lead in it. That's $200,000. So and so what's become standard in ENT is very expensive. And so that's not, that $400,000 is not payroll, medical malpractice insurance, the electric bill, rent. That is just the cost of doing business. So analogous specialties would be something like oral surgery. You know, the medical doctors that are also dentists that do things like wisdom teeth, but also much more surgery. They're very expensive. Being a dentist is similar. It's very expensive to practice dentistry. And so that's been the unintended consequence, the very inconvenient consequence of this transition of the site of service where we perform our procedures, is it's made it very expensive to practice ENT.
Did you foresee that when you were coming out of medical school and even out of residency? Did you see the trend leaning that way, or did you just always believe that you were going to be in a hospital and it was, hey, I'm going to walk in, professional fee given, perform the duty, walk out?
Right.
Or was it
the
there always the thought of
latter,
like,
the latter.
yeah, I figured.
I mean,
Yep.
where I finished, and I was very blessed to train at Vanderbilt in Nashville, one of the top 2 or 3 training programs in the world for ENT. Still to this day, it's even probably better to this day. But I was just before, so really this renaissance in ENT happened in the late aughts, 2006, 2007, 2008, with the advent of the sinus balloon. So very clever people, Josh Mackauer, who now runs the School of Biodesign at Stanford University, and many others, took John Dronell, who now works with Stryker in Kalamazoo, Michigan. They took the angioplasty balloon so that the cardiologists had been using in the heart since the 1990s and adapted it to open up the sinuses through the nose. Before that, we had been using drills and rasps and big instruments like we were carpenters in the nose. And it was very destructive and very traumatic. That's why people had black eyes for weeks after nasal surgery and had to have all the packing. So once we started using these balloon catheters, obviously it became much simpler and much easier for patients to recover. But that happened 3 to 5 years after I finished my training. So no, I really thought it was always going to be the good old days, in air quotes, where, you know, we had a very robust operating room and we had in one room amazing orthopedic surgery going on, another room ENT surgery, another room urology, another room plastic surgery. And it was really fun. Those days were fun because the surgeons were all at the hospital. We would eat lunch together. There was a lot of camaraderie, and we hardly ever go to the hospital anymore. If we do, it's for outpatient surgeries. And so it's changed immensely, not just in ENT, but in many other specialties too. Again, mostly for the better, but it sure made it expensive to practice ENT.
Yeah, and that's been a topic that I've conversed about with several guests, is just the science behind private practice, right? I don't want to say simplicity because that downplays it, and that's not fair, but the simplicity of being a hospital employee, surgeon, clinician, or otherwise, to be able to go in, go out, W-2 employee, do your work, go home, versus being a private practice, a business owner. And unfortunately, the schematics of that aren't really taught
Right.
in medical school. They're not taught in
You've heard me
residency
say
how
it
to
before.
how to run a private practice. Yep.
You know, I'm young for my class, so I have a June birthday, so I was always the youngest person pretty much. And even still, going straight through my training, I was 32 when I finished. So I did school twice. I went K through 12, that's 13 years, and then I did 13 more years. And before I started, so I would see my colleagues who took a job out of college 10 years before and had worked their way up to leadership positions and been able to save so much money for retirement and invest. And I literally, when I was at Vanderbilt, was making $2 or $3 an hour or less, depending on how many hours they were extracting out of me. So way under minimum wage, even at that time. And so you not only are you not making money and putting it away and investing, couple things that I think we should talk about on this topic. You have a sense of delayed gratification too. So not just expectations of how practice would look like, but expectations on how much money you would make to compensate for trading that decade that your colleagues had been out working for the big, back then it was the big six, and now it's probably the big three, big four, or whatever, building their careers. So that's a problem with physicians, because I think you come out and you're so ready to enjoy life, and you're finally making a little more money, not a whole lot more, but a little bit more. And you get overextended in the homes you buy, the cars you buy, the vacations you take. And I see so many of my colleagues that are more or less working paycheck to paycheck, even though they generate a lot of money. They're not making good financial decisions. So I think we should develop that concept too. But, yes, we go to school till we're 32. And most of us major in biology or chemistry or something in college, and we literally don't have 3 semester hours of business 101. And when we graduate and further, we're taught by professors that work within an academic institution. So they're employed physicians of Vanderbilt, of the University of Texas. And so they are not well versed in what it takes to run a private practice, because they've never done that. They've always been an employee, or they were a student. And so all of a sudden we're unleashed on these multi-million-dollar businesses, and as might be expected, even though they're intelligent people that make it through surgical training, without any business instruction or experience, most of these businesses are run very poorly. And what we do is we have no idea how to interface with United Healthcare, or what, or hire somebody, fire someone. How do you develop a workplace manual? I mean, you don't know any of these things. How do you offer your benefits to your employees? And so you delegate that to someone that's been around the block within the practice. But usually that's also a healthcare professional, not a business person. Perhaps a nurse or a medical assistant, someone that's at least interfaced with insurance companies for 10 or 20 years, and they seem to know what they're doing. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. And so these businesses, and my practice specifically was no exception, they're just not run very well at all from a business standpoint.
If we're going to provide some level of education to pre-med students, to those in medical school, to those in residency, so that they have that, what's the appropriate location for that? Is it in residency, where you can kind of identify, hey, if this is the route that you're going to go, certain percentage of physicians in this specialty are private practice, so you need to learn it here? Or do you dial it all the way back to someone who gets the biology degree or the chemistry degree to say, we're going to provide you business classes now in the event that you may go down this route in the future? What's the appropriate location for that?
I think at all levels. My two daughters, one is graduated from college, and she's actually working with me now in my office, taking a gap year before going off to medical school herself. The other one is a business major. She's entrepreneurship and marketing. And it's funny. So my older daughter and I, we've noted that going to med school, often we use the same textbooks. We have a lot of the classes repeated. It's more in depth, and it's, condensed into a smaller time frame. But you think, why did I take all that in college to then take literally the same textbook, not even just the same class in medical school? And so I find myself for sure envious of my other daughter and some of the classes that she's taking, thinking, man, that would really help me, even though now I'm fortunate to run 3 other big companies besides my practice. That's from the school of hard knocks over the past 20 plus years, thinking, gosh, if I'd had that even at the undergraduate level. And so I'm glad you asked that question, because this is yet another time for me to be able to announce. I mean, as these companies become more and more successful, what I plan to do is endow my institutions with the ability and professorships to teach the undergraduates, the medical students, and the residents, especially. If I had to pick one, it'd be the residents because they're almost done. The business aspects of medicine, maybe even as simple as running a business, simple tax laws, but certainly how to interface with third-party payers, those kind of issues, because it's completely neglected in medical education. It's hard to fathom in 32 years of education. You don't have one semester of one class of these kind of things, unless maybe you took personal finance in high school or something like that.
Sure.
I hope that we fix that. That's really critical.
Yeah, and you alluded to it earlier where a lot of these practices, and maybe it was one that you joined early on and it's grown, but a lot of practices in many specialties from a financial side of things are struggling, or they're just mismanaged simply because the physician or the practice leader didn't have the business acumen or the education that was built over time. And so they entrust their practice with sometimes someone with even a high school education that knows how to answer a phone and process some paperwork, right? To these
Right.
third party payers or insurance companies. And that's who's really, as an office manager, that's who's running their practice.
That's the rule, not the exception. And no disrespect. I want to clarify, those people are probably better than the doctor running it. But
Mm-hmm.
the general statement is that none of the above are doing a good job at running an efficient business. My practice at different times, and we can dive into that. My partners know I talk about this all the time for instructional purposes. It's not okay to run a business with, a 10-20% margin. I mean, that's like a restaurant. That's like a grocery store, especially when we're in an industry where we are reimbursed grossly very high still. Just halfway trying to run an efficient business, you can really be profitable. But what small level of profitability so many physicians accept is, in my opinion, unacceptable. And so much of my efforts and at least one of my companies is centrally focused on just that, helping my colleagues run more efficient businesses so that they can maintain their independence and not wave the white flag and under duress either take outside investment and lose control of their own business, or just become a W-2 for a hospital system and also completely lose control of their business. And I don't mean just the dollars and cents of the business. I mean that has implications in their patient care. They're no longer completely autonomous in their patient care either. So,
Yeah, good segue to my next thought. I want to finish up your thought though with, and again, nothing against a lot of the practices that are out there, but I feel like some of it is internally self-inflicted as far as the success of that practice, the margins that you were talking about. A lot of that is self-inflicted internally from an external factor, which kind of leads to my next thought that you were heading me towards. What are some of those external, I want to say detriments, but like the external factors that come into legislation within a practice or how a practice operates? I just think of like the acronyms, right? The DEAs, the FDAs, that are coming in. What type of impact do they have on a private practice like you have with Collin County versus, I mean, you have 5 other companies sitting out there that are healthcare related that probably have the same type of stipulation. So talk about some of those external factors that are pain points.
I'm not one of those people that likes to bitch and moan about government. I mean, we live in the greatest country in the world. I don't know. No one can even entertain an intelligent argument that we don't. So I'm not saying that it's terrible and the government needs to go away. But so much of what decreases my joy of practicing is non-physicians, specifically politicians, passing legislation that is completely asinine and doesn't improve patient care. It just wastes the time of people that have spent 32 years training to take care of patients. One example says it all, though there's many. Well, 2 examples, just to get it off my chest, right? So I do not have a single day that I don't have to talked to multiple insurance companies about routine things. So I saw a patient an hour ago that has had 6 sinus infections since last January. So that's in about a 12 and a half month period of time. Had a CT scan at an outside facility last summer that showed an active sinus infection, has tried all kinds of medication, everything they could possibly do over the counter. They come in for my expertise and experience to see what their options might be. And so I treated them again medically and wanted to obtain an updated CT scan to see where they are to plan surgical intervention. And, the AI or some non-physician person at this particular insurance company said, no, they just had a CT scan a couple months ago. They cannot have another CT scan. And so I had to take time with my staff to write out a long letter of list all the stuff that I did and which antibiotics and everything, and argue with someone that for sure is not an ENT physician and oftentimes not even a physician about whether this person can have a $126 test that I can get them better and save the insurance company from the 6 sinus infections in 2024, potentially. So that happens all the time. Even worse, we see, and there's a lot of litigation where it's not even this proverbial non-physician that's denying care. It's actually the AI. And so what one particular payer loves to do, and I'm not afraid to say it, even though I recognize my position and my influence, I think people need to hear that United Healthcare in particular is notorious for listing procedures that do not require prior authorization, that are under the purview of the physician, the surgeon, to perform and provide. And then what happens in so many cases, so for example, if I do an office sinus surgery, I've spent thousands of dollars literally on the equipment to do that. That's a one-time use that I have to throw in a biohazard bag to perform that on the patient. I have my own medical liability for performing that procedure correctly and safely for that patient. And then, within 30 days, then I get a notification that, well, we need to see your records to see if that procedure was indicated. Well, I thought contraction. Yeah, a post-auth is what I call it in a derogatory way, because my contract says that it's my choice. It's my decision whether that's right for that patient or not. If they want to change the terms, okay, let's renegotiate the terms and require a prior authorization. But what happens is then they're now using artificial intelligence and natural intelligence to comb through every record before the procedure was rendered. Remember, I've already done it. I've already paid the bill.
Right. Expecting
my payment to reimburse that. And they'll find any reason to deny it. And, I'm fortunate at times I can talk to other otolaryngologists, but oftentimes it's not. It's people that are not, first of all, in practice and certainly outside of my specialty, trying to defend what my decision-making was for a procedure that didn't require prior authorization. That's unconscionable. That is purely a way to avoid payment.
So these are consulting physicians in a specialty that is most likely not otolaryngology.
Right. And it shouldn't even be at that point, because it was a procedure that didn't require prior authorization. It is purely a way to avoid pain. And when you look at the bonuses, because these are public companies, when you look at just the bonuses annually of the leadership of companies like that, they're in the 9 figures, the bonuses. Whereas the average physician probably makes, not surgeons, but all comers, pediatricians and primary care doctors and psychiatrists, the average physician probably doesn't even crack $200,000 a year anymore. And these people are making 9 figures denying care. So at this point in my career, I'm not afraid to poke that skunk and call a spade a spade. The other thing is, you mentioned the DEA. This has become a real problem too, perhaps since that really popular documentary that's gone around the last year or two about this opioid crisis we supposedly have. I know there are a lot of people that are dependent and addicted on that. I'm not denigrating their medical problems, but what the non-physicians have imposed upon us is upward delegation. Another one of my favorite cliches I talk about here. So while I sit here, I literally just finished for my 6 surgeries that I have tomorrow, emailing the prescriptions. I have to do that, especially the narcotics. I have a couple of people having their tonsils out, which is extremely painful. First of all, they're going to hurt for 10 or 14 days. I can only prescribe 7 days at a time, first of all. So this time next week, I'm going to have to refill that medication again. Secondly, it has to be me. So I have to do it electronically. I have a 2-factor authentication. It has to be from this IP address. Even my physician assistant can't do it. So I travel for my other companies every week. And every week I literally have to carry this laptop around, my little key fob around, find Wi-Fi in the airport or whatever, because a patient needs a refill, because I can't give them 8 days or 10 days, or I can't delegate that to my staff anymore. That's absurd. That's utterly absurd. You know, what's happened here in Texas too, we have we're just touching all the bases here, Nate.
You bet.
We have a very strong pharmacy lobby. The pharmacists in the state are excellent people, but they're also very powerful politically. And so for my pediatric patients, what I see every week is a lot of pharmacists refusing to fill the narcotics for pediatric patients, especially ones that are 3, 4, 5 years old. And this is a painful operation. These kids are at risk for dehydration and rehospitalization if they don't drink afterwards. So we can't just give them Tylenol and ibuprofen, right? They need more. And we're not even going to touch on the other things that in Texas, you know, with the changes in our abortion laws, that pharmacists refuse to fill because drugs could be used for abortions, right? Even though they're prescribed for completely other reasons. And so I see that too, where just the headaches of being a physician are growing. And it's not why we went into it. We went into it because we love the patient care and we want to help. And when I'm spending hours every day doing medical record keeping, because that's been upwardly delegated to me, I'm the one that has to finally sign off on everything. Even if you have a scribe, even if you have this, I'm emailing prescriptions that 5 years ago, 15 years ago, one of our clerical helpers could do for us. Talking to insurance companies during business hours, no matter where I am, arguing over these simple things. It's really decreased the joy of the patient care. The patients are still wonderful. Where I practice, I just have really intelligent, well-informed people that are so grateful for what we do. That's the great part. But there's 2, 3, 4 hours a day of this other stuff that's just not too fun. And that's why physicians are leaving the profession in droves. As our elderly population grows, we have more and more people, in my early 50s, that are choosing to retire 10 or 15 years earlier than they thought they would and pursue other things because it's just become such a hassle.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that lies, it's the patient facing versus third party facing activities, right? Myself as a business owner, like you always have to tell yourself, like, I need to do revenue generating activities to grow a business.
Yeah, great.
I think for a physician, it is you are at your best when you are doing patient facing activities. And so it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is like in the past, before a lot of this legislation and the changes, it was easier for a physician to be in front of patients for a majority of their day and be able to delegate some of those non-patient or what I would call the office tasks to your staff. And it sounds like the two are kind of molding together now to where you're having to do more and more of your non-patient facing activities.
We can even look at it from what you said, revenue generating. For a physician, we work on commission, right? So
Good point.
the only thing that's revenue generating is facing the patient. So patient facing equals revenue generating in your analogy. And we therefore are spending hours doing things that aren't directly revenue generating, and they're not patient facing. Because it's just a new landscape of rules. It's an overcompensation for a few bad actors that overprescribe narcotics. Now, the millions of physicians in the United States have to do this. I mean, it's such an overcompensation.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I think you've done beautifully, and I don't know if this was probably by design, as you get into your early 50s, you think about what that next chapter of your career looks like. You've created a lot of businesses. The one that I think is most impressive to me versus what probably is most impactful to you, maybe two different places, but I want to talk about
They're all my
ENT.
kids, right? You can't say.
I was just
yeah.
honestly, as I was trying to formulate that sentence, I was like, man, he probably thinks highly of all of them. He doesn't have a favorite. The one that stands out to me the most is US ENT Partners. 2,600 physicians, 45 entities, combined to create more cost-efficient inventory in the ENT space. That's what I wrote down in my notes. I hope I nailed it.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that business.
We've grown even since that. So we signed another
Awesome.
big deal that I'll announce next week. But
talk to me about the genesis of US ENT Partners.
I love that. So that company, in short, is built out of the fact that ENT has become so expensive to practice. So backing up a little bit, I am one of those unusual physicians who enjoys the business aspects, and early on took over the business operations within my own practice simply because my two partners at the time really just wanted to do patient-facing things, and that's a good thing. That's not a criticism at all. But our business, when I joined it, had a lot of room for improvement, like almost every practice does. So more specifically, we were by a dying hospital. It's since reinvented itself, but back then it was losing physicians on a daily basis. They were going elsewhere. It wasn't very busy from a patient flow standpoint. So where we had kind of hitched our horse to, the hospital was drying up. Within the practice, it was a merger of three different independent solo ENTs, and one person retired. So the other two were left kind of wielding this staff with three different cliques, and they didn't mesh well. There was a lot of infighting and poor customer service. This is only 21, 22 years ago, but there was no website. We had paper charts. They had some of the ancillary. So ENT is a very interesting specialty from a business standpoint because we really have 7 subspecialties. Like I just do sinus and allergy. That's one of them. And 4 or 5 of those 7 have significant retail opportunities. So that's why ENT is the darling of outside investment going on 30 years. Cardiology kind of was the darling in the 1990s. But ENT has really been actively capitalized both from PE and VC, angels and everybody for the last 25 or 30 years. Because of that, there's economically impactful diseases. I mean, arguably from an economic standpoint, you could say that the disease states that ENT cares for is the most important, from sinus and allergies and the impact on presenteeism, the workforce, to obstructive sleep apnea, the danger there, the poor performance at work, the car wrecks, the plane crashes, all those things, and the head-to-toe morbidity and mortality from sleep apnea. Even little kids having ear infections keep parents home from work. They can't go to daycare, on and on and on. So within our practice, we had a couple of those ancillary retails opportunities like hearing aid sales, allergy shots, but they were not profitable. And again, in some of these, it's, where you have a pretty significant margin, it's hard to lose money, but I see it, and my practice was no different. They were losing money. It's something that should pretty easily be profitable. And so They hadn't really learned how to implement mid-level providers. Again, that was kind of a new thing back then. So over the subsequent 4 or 5 years, the first 4 or 5 years of my practice, I just took over these operations and made a lot of mistakes, made some good guesses, but learned a lot and really transformed our business where it was much busier because of our infrastructure. Whereas how I would describe it when I showed up, it was busy in spite of the infrastructure. And so other practices around North Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth took notice and started asking us informally for help, bringing on a physician assistant or fixing their hearing aid department or starting an allergy department, whatever. And so that morphed into a consulting company, just helping run better ENT practices and managing them, into what ENT Partners became, which is a group purchasing organization. So as this consulting company was forming, that transition of the site of service of procedures was happening. And so I noticed with my customers and myself how expensive it was becoming. And so we recognized the need for cohesive contract pricing, inventory management, those types of things. And so that's when the idea of forming an ENT specific group purchasing organization, GPO, came about. And that's what USENT is. USENT has thousands of members now, and there's only about 5,100 or 5,200 ENT physicians out in independent practice in the whole country. So we have the majority now, I can say, purchasing through our contracts. So in general, we're saving double digits across the clinic. And that's putting 50, 75, 100 grand of that 400 grand back into the practice. That's another one or two full-time employees. That's so many things that can be used for helping these physicians stay independent and run good businesses. But as I joke with my team, cost savings is really just day one. Day two through infinity, we're getting to know these practices and identifying other areas of business efficiencies that they could employ or new revenue opportunities that they may not be taking advantage of. So those are the three pillars: cost savings, business efficiency, new revenue, that we work within ENT practices, large and small. We have some practices that are well over 100 physicians, and we have many solo practitioners and all kinds in between. And we've moved over the years into adjacencies like allergists, sleep physicians, plastic surgeons, facial plastic surgeons. So kind of ancillary specialties right around ENT, and we help those doctors too.
Yeah. What a beautiful business model. I think it's kudos to you for building this. But I think what you've done is you've really amplified the voice of all these ENT physicians to be able to have negotiating power. I mean, I think that's what I took out of what you just said is
Yeah,
you're giving them the
scale,
opportunity
right?
to
Yeah.
save money. Yeah. That
And
was
it's a
kind of
win.
pillar
It's a
one.
win for the suppliers too, though. I want to be really quick. I mean, my supplier partners, we have 45 plus. The big companies that make ENT equipment.
Mhm.
They, I think, if you ask them to a person, are very pleased with the relationship too, because we're growing their business. So yeah, they're taking a couple pennies here and there off of each individual sale, but we're growing the entire specialty, implementing new revenue streams. There's so many practices that are not doing office balloons, or they can grow their hearing aid sales immensely or start allergy. And so we're giving the suppliers so much new business that they're happy to provide these discounts. So I feel like everybody's winning. The
Mhm.
physician, obviously USENT is winning, but the suppliers too.
I'm going to use an analogy just because I love analogies, and correct me if it's not even close. But USENT Partners in the otolaryngology space is kind of like the Costco
That's a good analogy.
comparison.
Yeah. If people
To
aren't
where all these
familiar
different
with it,
suppliers come in. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, look at Costco's revenue. They bring in. You can buy Adidas stuff. You can buy North Face. You can buy just about anything. Wine. Well, Costco's the biggest buyer of wine. So think
Yeah,
of
exactly.
you're pooling together all of these different suppliers.
Yeah, I consider that a compliment. I think that's
Okay.
the Costco, Sam's Club, those are
Mhm.
really efficient businesses. You know, some GPOs just have the reputation of squeezing every ounce of blood out of the turnip, as the cliche goes,
Mhm.
and just making suppliers write down existing business. We're really paranoid to not be a company like that. That any discount that's given over here is replaced with an increase in volume overall. I think that's what Costco does, or they wouldn't have all these people re-up and re-up,
Always.
like Adidas or North Face,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's what USENT is doing, is that they're so profitable too that they want to perpetuate the relationship.
Yeah, I think what Costco does well is that they nurture all of those relationships with their suppliers or their providers that people are fighting. They're like wanting to get into Costco.
Right?
And I think ENT Partners can do the same thing at some point in the future. Once you, sounds like you already have a majority of the market share. And so to be able to offer the additional services.
Yeah, we're fortunate to be in that spot where people do reach out frequently. And kind of an offshoot to that, I wish I could claim to be smart enough to have planned this. But remember, the other companies that I have in the ENT space, at least, this is the same customer base. And so we've kind of built this distribution channel. Again, it's how it's evolved. In my mind, these companies were all completely separate kids, right? As I joked about a moment ago. But it's worked out where that's the customer base. And so we can bring these other technologies and ideas to them and continue to provide value in different ways.
Absolutely. That's exciting. Well, I mean, I definitely want to, I'm going to bring you back for like a part two, if you're cool with that. Cause
Great.
I got to
Love
talk about your kids and not your daughters. I want to talk about all the LLC kids that you have, right? That you have, because we really touched on USENT Partners. I mean, I want to learn about all the other ones as well, but certainly don't want to take up too much of your time. But it's been a pleasure. Like I said, I'm going to bring you back. We're going to talk again sooner rather than later.
That's
Uh,
great. No, I love it. I love it. Yeah. Thank you for
but
the opportunity, Nate.
yeah, I'm glad we got time together today, and I look forward to when our paths cross again in the future.
Absolutely.